there because I have about 100 students in between two different classes,
Okay.
and usually 15 to 20 view it live, and then the rest are working or have sports practice or
Yeah.
whatever they do at Oxford Ole Miss of an evening. I don't even want to know about it. So, but eventually they watch this and complete an assignment that I turn in. So
Okay.
I got my hat to shade my eyes a little bit here so the lights don't glare on me. All right, I think we're ready to start. Just a little bit about yourself and how you come to be in your current position would be a good way to start.
Okay. That sounds good. And again, thanks for having me. My name is Doug Weezy. I've been in the policing, law enforcement, security, corporate security world going on in my 29th year. So don't do the math there. I know your students are good probably with the math. So you can know my age there. But I've been very fortunate to have different opportunities, both in law enforcement. I should say that I'm a St. Louisan, so I'm up here in St. Louis. I was in for St. Louis County Police Department. I did just under 13 years with them before I moved into the corporate world. So let me just start off by first saying, after I graduated college, I went to school for criminology, and I sat back and I had a great friend whose dad was the police chief at the time at St. Louis County, named Ron Battelle, and he would always talk to me about being a police officer, and I thought, it was interesting to me, but I was not so gun ho on doing that. But as time went on and I got to know him, he got me involved with a ride along, which I got to go out and ride along at a shift and really learn about what a police officer does in an 8-hour shift. And obviously, if you guys know anything about crime statistics, St. Louis and gives you some opportunities to try to mitigate some of those criminal enterprises there. So we were very busy, and I really all of a sudden liked it. Went to the police academy at the time was 5 months. Now it's 6 months full time police academy, and then when you graduate, you get put with a field training officer for another 3 months. So what I'm trying to say is, I did 4 years of college. I just did another 5 months of full time police academy, and then I did another 3 months of on the job training with a field training officer before I became a police officer out there on my own. And Randall, I hope it's okay. I'm going to tell a quick little story here, and this goes into a little bit about your studies and how you apply your studies in everyday life. And it's a little bit comical at the end, not so much at the moment, but so like I just said, I went through all this training. And now I have my, uniforms pressed. My shoes are shined. I got my badge on. I'm like ready to fight crime, right? Like I am this crime fighting machine now. I'm so happy, so proud, and so I'm patrolling in my neighborhoods, going very slow, looking for bad guys, and it's like 2 o'clock in the morning, and I remember it was nice out, so my windows of my patrol car was down, and as I was driving, the dispatcher said my call sign was 3104. They said 3104, shots fired, and so I answered back. I said 3104, go ahead, and they gave out the addresses. I'm writing down the address in a piece of paper because we didn't have car computers back then. This was pre all the technology now they have. I realize I'm coming up to the street, the intersection where this house is on. As I turn the corner, the house is actually on the first corner as I turn, and I see two guys running from the front porch into this car that's now parked right in front of me, and I'm nosed into that car. And keep in mind, it's pitch black, right? So I have my lights going, I have my spotlight on them, and because of the nature of I got out of the car, I got my shotgun out because I was by myself, and I went around the back of my car to open up the passenger door so I could give commands to the driver. And I guess I did that so I could look at the driver right in the eye because he was parked the opposite way. But at the meantime, I could hear someone screaming for help about 20, 30 feet away from me in the park in the driveway. But I never looked at him because I had that tunnel vision, right? I was focused on the and that's all I had, right? I was just focused on this driver. and I could hear the sirens coming for the cavalry to help me. And then all of a sudden I realize, I get this, and you can see my video, as I'm like this giving commands, blah, blah, I get this tap on my shoulder, and I'm like, I look back and there's this large man right behind me. And I'm like, excuse me, I'm kind of busy now. What do you need? Right? Like, you can hear me yelling, we got the screaming. This guy's just as peaceful and as calm. He's Ken. He goes, okay, no problem, but I'm the shooter. And I was like, what? So this guy just shot somebody, and he's now standing behind me. And luckily, it was a good guy, and these guys came over to do some harm. It worked out for me. So my gist of my story is all this training and everything that I just went through, and I was gung ho and ready to do. But in the moment of this crisis, my first real crisis to handle by myself, I had tunnel vision, and I didn't realize anything else going on but just this. And you know what I lacked? I lacked the experience, right? So I had all the training, I had everything to be able to uh, to handle the situation, but I lacked this experience. So I quickly learned now. Every time I got out of the car, I scanned the whole area right before I would do anything, right, to look for stuff. So sorry, a little bit of sidetrack, but I wanted to just give that tidbit of, you're always learning, right, and you're always training, but then you're always applying what you learn. So
Great
anyway.
story. As
Yeah.
many stories as you want. That's what we want to
Okay.
hear.
All right. Well, I have a bunch of them, but again, that was a big teaching moment for myself, right?
Yeah.
So then I did. I was a patrol officer for a while, and then I was able to get into, at the time they called it neighborhood policing, but we did like all the neighborhood watch programs, we did all the business watch programs, and we did special assignments right for the captain. Did that for a few years. I did a little stint in our bomb and arson group, and then from there I moved into our special operations group. The bomb and arson team was fantastic. Didn't didn't care for the fire side of it, investigating the fires. That's it was very dirty, meticulous work, but enjoyed obviously the bomb piece of that, and everything associated with that. But then I had the opportunity to go in our special operations. So like everybody sees it on TV, the SWAT type of stuff. So there I did that for my last 5 years of career. So we handled all the presidential details, every search warrant that was done in our county. We handled any type of barricaded subject. So if someone would barricade themselves in a house that was armed, they would call us, and I was part of the negotiating team. And so I was responsible to negotiate the scenes. So there was a lot of great opportunities there. With that training, I also volunteered on the suicide hotline, really to hone in, to talk to someone in crisis, to understand when someone's in that type of mental capacity, to help out with, so I can apply it on the street. And then from there, from my police experience, all of a sudden someone knocked on my door and said, you know what, we're looking for someone like you with your background. You have law enforcement, you have the tactical side of it. You're able to plan a lot of different events, large scale protests, blah, blah, blah. And they said, would you be interested in leading an executive protection team for a corporation? And I sat back and I said, well, first off, I love my job. I had no intentions of changing. And I sat there and I thought, man, I wonder what this is all about, right? So I said, you know what? Yeah, give me the information about it, and let me learn a little bit about it. So I did some research on it, because I really didn't understand, why would a business need security, and especially executive protection. So executive protection is basically the secret service for a business, right? So we travel everywhere with the CEO or the delegates of the executive team throughout the world. So I was a little kind of naive, I think, of what I got myself into. But then I applied for the role, I interviewed for the role, and lo and behold, I was offered the opportunity to join it. And that company's name in St. Louis was called Monsanto. I don't know if anybody here on the call has known that company. It's an agriculture company. Was, like I said, the headquarters was in St. Louis. It was a global company. At the time, we had about 25,000 employees, and we had a gross revenue around 16 billion. So fairly a decent sized company. And so, but the issue there with that company, it was controversial, and the crops that they were manufacturing had this little tagline called GMO. Has anybody heard of GMO? GMO is genetic modified organisms, and the activist side of it is that it's evil, it's synthetic, it's frankenfoods, like it's just this worst evil thing. You're hurting the environment. In reality, a GMO is basically taking a natural cry protein and taking a DNA sequence of a plant and taking that cry protein and putting it in the right page, and they have different modes of action then that they can put in there. And then when you plant that seed in the ground, and as that seed grows and the insects or pests come and they eat on the roots or eat on the plant as it grows, it automatically kills them. So you don't have to spray insecticides, you don't have to do pesticides, and it's all natural. So it's huge benefit for the environment, and there's different techniques that they do with it. So the activists were very angry about this GMO, and I obviously learned a lot about it while I was there at the company. And I will tell you, our CEO was the nicest person, down to earth, treat you like an equal that you could ever imagine. His name was Hugh Grant, not the actor, if you know that, a British actor, Hugh Grant, but his name was Hugh Grant, and he had a team of 10 executives here, and we were responsible for his travel. Our chief technical officer, who was the godfather basically of GMOs, and we also did our chief operating officer. And they would get literally death threats, no lie, in the mail, through emails, phone calls, daily, weekly, monthly, and it was just nonstop. And it was so much so that we really had to be on point. I put together, so I was hired to run a team there. I put together of other individuals like myself that we all had tactical experience. We all were armed. We had other measures that we deployed as well. And while we were there, we also all became emergency medical technicians, EMTs. So we went to school for that while we were actually working it as well. That was another thing that we did. And the reason why we did that, as we traveled in agriculture, as you can think, the farms and where the food is not in a big city, right? We have a lot of resources. It's in all the rural areas. And I'm talking about out in Mexico and Brazil and Africa, all the areas that do not have infrastructure if something happens to take care of. So that's why we also trained in the medical side besides of the gun side, right? So I put together the team. We did that. It was one of the best decisions that I made. I had a little bit of transition period there, right? So I went from the private public sector, the government work, where it was quasi-military. If you know this term, quasi-military, it just means that it has a very structured command staff, right? So you have your police officer, you have your sergeant, you have your lieutenant, you have your captain, you have your major, and you have your colonel, which is your chief. And that is your chain of command. And each of the division had a major in charge of the division. Each precinct had a captain, and then each shift had a lieutenant and 3 sergeants. And then you had a shift of about 20 to 25 officers on each of the shifts. And we had 7 precincts through our county. And then if you were in a specialized unit, you normally had a captain running that. And then you had a sergeant above your team. And then you also had team leaders. So I was a team leader when I was there as well. And so what happens is when the sergeant would get the orders, they'd give it to team leader. Then we would put the op together, whatever we were doing, and then we would communicate that to the team. We would set it up, who was where, what they were doing, and then also do the action after report. And I will say, getting in law enforcement, some of the things that are very important is your writing skills, because you have to articulate what you see. Because when you go to trial 6, 7, 8, 10 months down the road, you have to read that report so that you bring back your mind so that you can testify and be accurate and that there's no mistakes at all. And that's very important. So I wanted to call that piece out with that. So doing that transition, that was a little difficult because you got to remember, I was on pager, which meant that I had a shift that I worked. But as soon as I left that shift and I went home and I'm meeting with my family, if my pager went off, I would jump back in my car and boom, head to the scene. Sometimes I would get called out for 4 hours, 6 hours, 8 hours. The longest that I was on deployment in a call back after working 8 hours was another 12 hours. So that was over a 20-hour day, which was a pretty exhausting experience. And that was a barricaded subject that we had. He basically was in a mental crisis where he thought there was aliens in his wall. When we went to the house, he took a couple shots at some officers that were doing to check the welfare. They weren't shot, but they called us. We tried to negotiate with them. After a few hours, we couldn't do anything. We then shot some what's called CS gas into the house through through an SL6, which propelled the gas through the windows. We gassed the house, waited a while. The gas didn't work on him. We sat there. We negotiated some more. We filled the house up with more gas. We tried to approach. He shot at us again through the door. So that was a very long scene, but peacefully we were able him to come out after that long standoff there. Okay, sorry. Jumping back to my Monsanto days there in the executive protection. So after I did that for six years, was very fortunate to be able to travel the world in this role, and that was one of the draws that really got me out of my career, my law enforcement career, into this private sector. And I've been all over the world operating in this security package. That I'm not a government worker, so I wasn't armed, but we set up our detail and such that we always had enough coverage and security measures wherever we went. We ran details in every country that you can think of. Our main countries was Mexico, Brazil, Argentina. Like I said, we did a lot of business in Africa. At the time, they were working on drought-tolerant corn, so that was a big push. If you guys know the Bill Gates conversation and the Bill Clinton Foundation, they were partnering up to do water projects there in Africa. So we partnered with them, and we did a lot of different wells and stuff to bring waters in these very poor and areas that the food was growing in. With that, though, there's obviously very poor conditions. So it was very sometimes we were in not nice areas, right? So we were in South Africa, in Nigeria, Kenya, Zimbabwe. I'm trying to think of some hairy locations that I had. Indonesia was another one. Jakarta actually had a car bomb go off from an Al Shabaab operative there, which is a fraction of Al Qaeda there while we were on a detail. It didn't affect us. But it was down the street. It's a little spooky when that goes off at night. Kind of gets your heart racing a little bit. Then I was in some great countries like Germany, Switzerland, China was fantastic. Was able to walk on the Great Wall of China, Tiananmen Square, Forbidden City. So I got a lot of great memories from doing that work.
Doug,
from there,
how did you prep? How did you prep for these different countries? Did you
that's
read a lot of
great.
material, or how'd you do that?
Yeah, no, great question, and I hope that I'm not the only one talking here. That you guys asked some great questions. So I think through my years and being a special operator and in the police department, really, you go to operator or school there, and there's different types of schools there, and one of them is dignitary protection. So you learn how to put motorcades together. When you're driving down the road, you're scanning in what we call a 9-box, right? So you're calling out if you want to say either a clock, you can say it's at 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 11 o'clock, or you can do it a 9-box. So think about, 1 being down in this corner, and then you go all the way through, and then 9 is on the far corner. So if you see something happen, you can either call it out on the radio real quick, and then everybody knows exactly where you're talking about, right? And so that was a great prep work to understand that. When I joined the company, they sent me to a dignitary executive protection school built right for the private sector. So it kind of took that government edge out of it. And I hope this doesn't come off the wrong way, but in the government, when you come in, you have the law, you can do what you want to. When you're in the private sector, you lose a lot of that, no arrest powers. You know, a lot of restrictions on what you can do on that. So that was the next school that I went to, and then I also went to what was called a high risk travel school, and there was a very intense 3 day school up in Spokane, Washington, where you come into class and you think you're going to have a 3 day in class, you know, like you come and show up for class. But in reality, you come into class, and for the first 4 hours, they're kind of giving you some PowerPoint presentation. And right before you break for lunch, they had 6 armed masked gunmen come into our classroom, and there was only about 12 of us in this class. And they basically kidnapped us. They held it as hostage, and then that role play went on for 12 hours, from noon until midnight. Very limited with food and water. They brought us in different rooms. They separated us. They interviewed us. They put us in with like jihad music. You know, they threatened us. They pulled up our social media. They did all that stuff, and that was our basically our learning. And the next day we debriefed that, right? And they videotaped the whole training thing. So they critiqued it, right? And then they asked us questions. So that was a very valuable lesson as well. So that was another great prep. And then when on the job training, like I mentioned, you know, you got to have the practical exercise. So you can go through the training, but you also got to apply it. So then what we would do in some of our downtimes when we weren't traveling with the executives there in St. Louis, I would put a fake itinerary together. I would become the executive, and then I would make my team take me around the location, and then I would have someone be the bad guy to take pictures, to try to throw something at us, to cause a reputational issue, whatever that might be. So that was something that we did in-house as well. Same way on the medical side of it, you know, that was something that we used all the time. So I had a paramedic as a part-time role for me. He would put scenes together. We'd have to treat them, you know, just because if we're out there in the wilderness somewhere, that we can get them either to the corporate plane or wherever we're doing, so we can get them back to a hospital. So that was a great question. I hope I answered it. And the other takeaway to that question is it's always evolving. Don't ever stop. Don't ever stop training. Don't ever stop thinking that you know it all. Don't ever stop because you think that you have all this experience, because everything is going to change. And not to tell another story, but I will give the active shooter scenario to this, right? Everybody knows about active shooter. Um, when active shooter really came to be an issue in the schools was from 1999 in Columbine, Colorado. Eric Klebold and Harris. I can't think of Harris's first name, but Klebold and Harris were the two shooters that went in there. What they did is they actually put improvised devices. You guys can Google this too to see how there's some after action videos that you can watch to see what their thought process was, their mental capacity that went in, the warning signs, which is more important, right? That pre-warning signs over time that were ignored by a lot of people on it. But they had explosive devices they put in the parking lot of propane bottles with nails wrapped around it, with incendiary devices to blow the top off, to blow the device. And he did that in knowing that the law enforcement and fire were going to stage in a certain area because he wanted to kill the most people possible. They also did it inside the school in the pillars. They wrapped them around the pillars, thinking that if they would detonate, it would knock the school down. And really, when they went through, there wasn't a lot of training in the schools now. I know there's a lot of other training in schools, but you can see in the video, because there was the video inside the school, that students really didn't do anything. They just they sheltered in place, you know, hid underneath desk, and I hate to use this term, but it was like shooting fish in a barrel, right? Nobody gave themselves an opportunity. And I give this example because over time, I was already in law enforcement at the time, and we were trained that if some shooting was going on in a building, I had to wait for 3 other officers to come to form a 4-man team to come into that building, right? So then fast forward over the years, it changed to if you roll up on a shooting, you immediately go in, you radio your location and you go in because the goal is to eliminate that threat so you can stop the loss of life, right? So what I'm saying is you can see how that morphed over time. And that's very important. The other thing that we realize is everybody hear the run, hide, fight, right? Department of Homeland Security, run, hide, fight. I think that's very common used throughout the U.S. The fight piece is very important to me because it's not that I'm going to sit there and I want to box with someone that's got a gun. The fight is what am I going to do to survive? And that has really changed. And that message has to be in everybody. And that's that flee or fight adage, but that fight piece. So if someone came in this door, there's no way out but that door. That means I got to do something. I'm throwing something. I'm distracting him. I'm tackling him. I'm trying to get my buddy with me. Come on, let's go. Let's do it. I'm doing whatever it takes to survive, and then I'm running away or doing whatever. I'm not talking about fighting with him, but I'm just talking about you're saving yourself in those circumstances. And I use that example because that really over a 20-year period, that philosophy really about a 10-year period really changed in how you respond to those type of incidents. And that's the key takeaway there.
Doug, you explained quite a bit on external investigations and moving your corporate people around. What about internally? You had thousands of employees there who handled the interior white crime issues or just even the simple computer misuse, the things that happen.
Sure.
How'd that work out?
Yeah. So I can say how it is now or how it was back then. So when we had our headquarters in St. Louis, we had all our teams. And if you remember, I touched on this very quickly. But in the police department, we had different divisions, right? And this is set up in any type of law enforcement, federal, local, state, it doesn't matter. They have different divisions. So one division is your patrol. That's your uniform. That's every day out there on the street answering the radio calls. Then you'll have like a criminal investigations division. That will be like your homicide, robbery, your petty crime, your cyber crime, whatever it might be is in that bucket. You'll have a communications bucket. You'll have a special operations bucket. And now I think they also have a human resource bucket, right, to take care of all that. So that model, because everybody in the corporate that I worked for, and even on my team now, there was a few avenues that those individuals come on that team. Well, there's 3 avenues: through law enforcement, military, or just out of college to corporate security. That's possibility too, right? So it's those 3 avenues. In each of those, to even go not so much in the military now, but in law enforcement and some law enforcement, most are at least a 2-year degree. And then now the local stuff are all changing to 4-year degrees, just like the federal is 4-year plus, right? So if you go FBI or wherever you like that, they're looking for the advanced degrees now, right? So that's similar to how it is, in us. So we're set up the same way in the corporate. We have someone that kind of looks at the physical aspect of security. So in that you have your site security. So that's like your guards, the ones that are taking care of the site. You have what we call vulnerability assessment. So we're pressure testing the security measures that we have around the assets that we're protecting. We have our investigations. So we do everything for the company that's criminal, right? So if it's a threat, if it's a theft, if it's, you mentioned intellectual property move, right? So if we have an employee that moves something from our network, outside our network that's not supposed to, that would come to us to investigate. You mentioned cyber. So our cyber teams would recognize that, if it's ransomware or if it's a bot of some type, our cyber teams would then work on restoring the network, but then that would come to us for the investigation side of it. So we're broken up into different segments just like that. Now, my role is I run the teams. I also have our fire teams for our production facility. And then I also have our safety teams as well. There's a lot of OSHA requirements, a lot of reporting back, regulations back to the U.S. government. Corporations have to follow to operate in the U.S. Did that answer, Randall, the question?
Yeah, I was because white collar crime and issues around offices and things like that is kind of an overlooked part of criminal justice courses. So I want
Oh,
you to
yes.
I want you to hit that a little bit, that's a big area. And I found in working with courts that even if I had someone who was misusing computers, allowing their password to be used to look into student records that were really confidential on the juvenile side, it was really hard to get internal investigations because the courts don't look at things like that. They don't want to look at their
Yeah.
employees. So I was curious. It sounds like that corporate goes a lot further. Class,
Yeah.
don't forget that we have a place here for you to post questions in the chat. You can pull that up. It shows up on my screen on the right-hand side. So if you have any questions, I think Mr. Wheezy's going right through my questions really well. Columbine was a big part of my existence
Oh,
too, because following Columbine, a lot of courts and county commissioners started looking more at what juvenile departments were doing with students, kids that would come our way, making sure they were supervised, because the stuff you described was things that we would hope somebody else in the community would see, or parents would report, or somebody could get in a home and check out a kid's basement or bedroom, which I did quite often with any kind of little threat that would come in from school people. But it really changed our existence. Plus, it added a ton of grant money. Our budgets exploded after Columbine.
mhm.
So I was able to go from $14,000 worth of grant money to at my peak, it was $800,000
Oh, wow. Wow.
before the dot-com crash and a lot of the government money freezed up. We were running alternative schools and doing all kinds of stuff with grant money following Columbine. So changed
Yeah.
a lot for our careers.
Yeah, no, and unfortunate these incidents are, they also are a learning tool of soft targets, right? So we call them soft targets that maybe are easier on the security measures, right? And maybe at the campus there at Ole Miss, you have certain protocols to get into the building, right? And maybe it's badge activator, or you have to go through a security location to get into. There's all reasons why that is designed that way. And like I mentioned, Combine was something that we really learned from. And I will tell you, in putting together our workplace violence program at the corporation, we used a lot of our training. Like I mentioned, I was a hostage negotiator for 5 years. I talked to a lot of victims. I talked to a lot of suspects, and I talked to a lot of witnesses. Right. So with that bubble, you learn a lot of different mindsets of how they're looking at different things. And we understand quickly what works and what didn't work and what should have happened and what they shouldn't have done. And then you start looking at these other exercises that you get the debrief on them. So always look at that and learn from them. And that's another good takeaway is, again, never stop learning on something like that. The other big one that we did a lot of work on is the Virginia Tech shooting. With Cho was the suspect's name of that. That was, for a long time, he held the most in one event. And I can't remember quite the number, but I think it was like 23 individuals, I think, lost their life there. But there was a lot of warning signs. There was a 2-year period before that shooting happened of warning signs. And one of the professors there took it upon herself to try to help the student at the time, and got him triaged in the medical system. But again, because of the time in the country, it wasn't something that was sustainable. He knew how to kind of circumvent that, and he was only triaged for about 36 36 hours, and he was released. And then a few weeks later, he did the shooting there. But there is some good stories out of it, but it was also some learning stories out of this, and this is one of the things that we highlighted. And as he got into the building, he was going in different classrooms. One of the students took action and barricaded the door, and he wasn't able to get in that classroom. And everybody in that classroom survived. And so again, fast, decisive, and didn't second guess, and took immediate action and saved lives there. The other one is another student, when he came in, jumped out of the window. And you think, okay, jumped out of the window to save, but the window was on the second floor. So he did that knowing that I'm going to get hurt, but I'm not going to get shot. But guess what? Other students started doing the same thing. And again, that action saved lives. And that's why I can't stress that enough. That's that fight. That's that fight piece. And don't think of the common, putting the dukes up to fight. It's survival is that mindset.
Too bad it takes these critical events to move policy, but that's what it
Uh,
does.
we got to move more policy on these.
Okay,
Sure.
speaking of policy,
Yes.
well, there's a question on the chat, but I'm going to ask this policy question before my old brain forgets it. You
Okay.
dealt with the chain of command when you worked with St. Louis County.
Yep.
And so when you were talking about increased budgets or moving money from one account to another or any kind of changes, you're dealing with somebody in a chain of command that's probably had your position, maybe even been a patrolman. But when you moved over to private side, your chain of command is probably not looking at somebody from an LEO experience or a law enforcement background.
Yep.
So
Yep.
was that a challenge for you or a stressor in your job to be dealing with corporate types as compared to law enforcement types?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, and I think the simplistic answer, in law enforcement, again, it's that quasi-military. So you're pretty much told what to do, when to do, how to do it, right? And obviously, you have discretion in when you patrol. It's not that much, but if there's anything out of the ordinary, you have to get permission from. And depending on the level of the permission, it goes up the chain. In the corporate world, and as you mentioned, there's certain policies on everything you do. It's your responsibility to know the policies. If you violate the policy, you're going to get in trouble, right? So you're going to get reprimanded from HR. Could be a compliance investigation, depending on what that is, and your boss is going to come in on you. But you don't have the span of control that you do in law enforcement as you do in the corporate world. They actually give you more freedom in your scope, and depending on your corporate level ranking that you are, gives you a larger amount of responsibility. So let's just say that I can sign a contract for $1 million for the company, right? But my boss can sign a contract for $20 million, right, for the company. I can approve expense reports for $10,000. My boss approves expense reports for $100,000 or whatever it might be. And that is the different levels that you would have to go through in the corporate side. On the other difference in the corporate side is, establishing trust and always being a team player. It's similar in law enforcement, but it's more so on the corporate side. And let me explain what I mean by that. Is you're a subject matter expert in my field. So let's take an investigation. But I need HR, I need legal, and I need cyber teams to work together to handle this investigation. I need cyber to tell me what happened, how they worked on it, how they got in the network, right? Who's maybe responsible, they know. I need legal to tell me what I can do, what I can't do, what does the company want me to do, right? Because it might not be worth the company to go after this case if it costs a lot of money to prosecute in this. So they might say, hey, we make note of it and move on. And then each HR, of course, they're looking at the employee rights piece of it. So that is our key stakeholders that we constantly deal with. And you always got to have that team approach on it. I think that was the point that I was going to make there, Randall.
Doug, you're describing a whole lot of reading and a whole lot of writing, aren't you, in your job?
It is nonstop. I can show you the paperwork I got here. I just got a new book that I'm reading called Crisis Leadership Now. I also run our crisis management team, so I'm always looking for from past examples, learning from past examples. We're actually running a crisis tabletop exercise here in May, so I am just learning some more on that. I also went to school for this, so I took a class at Northwestern University outside of Chicago on crisis management to get a certificate in this. So that, I didn't stop there. I've handled numerous crises throughout my career, including, obviously in law enforcement, but most so, in this pandemic. Wow, something that corporations never dealt with before. Understanding how business had to continue to operate and nobody could be at work, right? How do we do that? And then also to make sure that we're adhering to all the government regulations that were coming out. We were also responsible for making sure that we are interpreting what was being said, and then we were enforcing what was being said on our workforce. So yeah, it was a very challenging time. But with all that, what I'm saying to say, I don't sit still, and I'm now just got this book. This book is by Lawrence Barton. I actually know him. He's very good in the workplace violence side of it, but he's also good in the crisis management side of things. So I bought his book. So yes, reading reports, reading updates. And then like I said, communication, articulation of what you see, especially in the law enforcement side, regardless of what branch you go into, even if it's military, even if it's federal, if it's local. You're going to be writing novels because you got to write exactly everything down so that you can remember it. Like I said, when you go testifying in court.
Yeah, and every year there's law changes. Every year the legal
Uh,
side, the statutes change just a little bit, enough that you have to read another 100 pages of a statute or bill just to keep up. So there's a lot of reading involved in criminal justice jobs and in private industry jobs too, it seems.
Yeah, and that's a great point. So in law enforcement, you'll have your general orders, right? Special orders, general orders, and this is basically your operation guide, right? In the corporate, you have policy, you have guidance documents, you have knowledge documents, and then you have your regulations documents. And and there is no excuse not to know that you violated one of those. I'll tell you that right now. So yes, it's nonstop. That's for sure.
Well, let's ask a question here that Megan Perry posted on chat. I don't know if you can see it. I can read it if you can't.
Um,
It says, I know you mentioned several different positions that you worked in and the types of scenarios you were involved in. How did you manage the stress that your job might have placed on you? Did you ever feel that your job was a little too overwhelming for you?
Oh man, what a fantastic question. And I could give so many examples where I thought, what am I doing type of scenario. And like that one story that I gave, with the large man tapping on my shoulder, rookie by myself. I can say after I had to change my pants, right? I really didn't sit and think about it until after my colleagues got there. We arrested everybody. And let me finish that story. So this was a dad protecting his daughter. There was three individuals that came over at 3 in the morning or 2 in the morning, whatever it was, to try to get into the house. They were making threats. They said they had a gun, but guess who had a gun? Dad had a gun, right? As one of them tried to come in the house, he shot him. And what I saw them running, but what happened is after dad shot the one and he shot him through the legs, they were picking him up, dragging him down the sidewalk. And as they got to the driveway, they looked and saw my shiny white car, my police car. They dropped him to get in their car to get away. And that's what I saw, right? Like I said, everything worked out, but I sat back and I said, it was a life lesson, right? Life lesson. To this day, I still remember this. I still can smell it, right? And this is 28 years ago, right? on that. So yes, the stressors of that. I will tell you, over time, you learn how to calm yourself down and to be in the moment and resort back to the training and your experiences. And I really honed this more so not when I was in the patrol, when I was in special operations, and I took a negotiating class. And it was even much so for the suicide hotline. Is you just, you take they call it tactical breathing, right? In through your nose, you hold it, and then out through your mouth. And you do that about 3 or 4 times, slow, hold it a few seconds, and then let it go. And that really helps you calm in, and it'll oxygenate yourself that you are focused on your task at hand. And that really helped. But then the human side of it, I lost a lot of sleep, thinking about stuff. I would have a recurring nightmare. I remember this when I was in law enforcement, and even outside of law enforcement, that I would be in a shooting situation, and I would have my gun out, and I was ready to fire, and I couldn't pull the trigger. And as hard as I tried, I couldn't pull the trigger. And I never knew why I would have this. And it was a reoccurring here and there. It wouldn't be every night. It wouldn't, it would just maybe be, a few times here and there. But I had this, and that was part of the stress of it. So I didn't really know the technique until I got into that specialized training in what to do. It doesn't prepare for you. I was a father. I am a father still, thank goodness, to this day. And I gave mouth to mouth to a 18-month-old who drowned in a pool. And I still get choked up over that. And again, that was 28 years ago. Survived. Survived. Yeah. So the stress is going to be with you. It's how you are resilient with it, how you bounce back from it, and you have the right mindset that you learn from it. And that's the biggest takeaway from that is having the self-reflection and being able to be resilient and like that Teflon, right? That, hey, I'm knocked down a little bit, I'm wiping myself up, and now I'm back on the way, right? If you make a bad decision and do something well, you don't dwell on it, you learn from it, and you move on to the next one. And that was evident in more so when I was doing our executive protection, because at the executive level, they want excellence. They don't want any hiccups. They don't want any excuses. It's an executive. If something doesn't go right, they'll move on to you. So it was a very high stressed environment. It was a pleasant environment, but it was a very high stress. So we would navigate, and if there was a mistake, we would just keep acting like this is planned, right? And we keep moving on as long as it wasn't detrimental on that piece.
How'd the
And
family?
One story with that. I was in Haiti, and it was right after the earthquake back in 2012. I'm sorry, 2010, and we just donated a bunch of seed to the government down there because of they lost all their infrastructure, and it was a poor community in itself. And I went down with 2 principals that I was protecting. I hired local individuals, and it was so poor they didn't want to ask for anything, and I was feeding them. I noticed that we were very low on fuel, and I told the guy, I'm like, hey, listen, I never want to go below a half a tank, because you never know what you're going to deal with, right? So you never go below a half a tank. So I would always make them fill up every day that we got a full tank. We never go below a half a tank. And we were going out to a rural area, and I noticed I just glanced down, and the fuel light was on, and I'm like, I nudged him. I had the principals in the back. I'm like, do we need fuel? He's like, oh, it's okay. A little bit of language barrier there. It's a French dialect that they speak in Haiti, but he spoke English. And I'm like, okay, keep going. Guess what? We ran out of gas in this not so nice neighborhood. Individual, they can see that we're dressed nice, even though we just had khakis and polos on. We're not local, and we were drawing a crowd. I had to quickly move, and luckily I had a foul car with me. I ended up moving my 2 principals in the foul car, and we left that car there. But again, that's how you prepare yourself, but you're resilient, right? That was a huge mistake. I didn't check that, but I didn't worry about it. I just moved through it, and we got through the the detail there. So sorry, Randall, I cut you off there.
No, that's a great story. Needed to hear that one. And you still live to tell this tale. That's the main thing.
Yeah, look, knock on wood, I'm still surviving and all the crazy stuff that happened. So
So, how about the family, Doug? Do they deal better with your corporate life than your police officer life, or how did the change affect them?
yeah, so great, another great question. I think over time now it's a lot easier to manage. In law enforcement, it was really good. When I first got in law enforcement, I just got married. It was in law enforcement, so it was all kind of happening at the same time, if you want to say. And at the police academy did a great job. They had what was called a family night, and I could invite whoever I wanted to. So I obviously wrote and invited my parents and my spouse to come, and my sister and her family, and they were able to see what kind of training we're on. But they also set the expectation. We work 24/7. We're going to be missing some things. This is, we're living the job. You're kind of always on, right? In the state of Missouri, we were required to always carry our firearm. We always had our badge with us. There was only 2 times that I didn't have to have this on me, per our policy, our internal general order. That is if I was at a bar, obviously alcohol, you can't drink and have that, or if I was participating in a sporting event. That was it. Those were only 2 times. And so they really learned right from the beginning. And then as my kids, were born and grew up, to be honest, they didn't know anything different, right? They just expect this is what it was. So it was more of an easier transition. But I will say, I missed a lot of family events. I missed a lot of birthdays. I missed a lot of Christmases. When I was in special ops, I can tell you every year for 5 years that I did that, we were called out on Christmas morning for a domestic fight every Christmas of all days, right? And so it always delayed my kids opening up their presents. But getting in the corporate executive protection was another thing not great on the family. A lot of travel. I was gone a lot. And then as I took different jobs, I call it, I became more of a real person where it's more Monday through Friday. I'm on the phone a lot, maybe on the weekends or at night, but for the most part, it's been always well supportive, I would say. But with that, I will say, if you get your time, take your time off, recharge the battery, spend time with your loved ones. It's very important to do that. It might not mean much right now, but in 10 years, you'll sit back and say, I remember what Doug said. It's very important to recharge those batteries.
All right, class, we're running really close to the end here. If you have any more questions, you need to either write them out or turn on your mic and tell us now for the ones that are present, which I am completely grateful to all you students that showed up tonight live. Somehow we managed to cover all of my questions. Is there anything you thought I would ask, Doug, that I didn't ask?
Um, I think, for me, as your students here, and again, I appreciate everybody's time as well. I think it's fantastic that you guys are able for me to share some of my experiences and stories with you. I think there's some things that I mentioned that maybe I'll just go back and reflect on. And is as you advance in your career, you become your own expert, whatever you chase in life, and have fulfillment. Enjoy it, right? And it won't be a job for you, right? If you really enjoy it, it won't be a job. Um, but I mentioned a couple things, right? Self-reflection is very important, to always sit back and ask how I could have done that better, right? Even if it went perfectly, getting feedback from someone else that maybe you don't see, we call that a blind spot, is very important as well. So have someone that you can trust, as you have a mentor or coach in the future. That's been very important for me. I was very lucky. I had a great individual that I could call up and say, hey, what about this? What about that? How would you handle this circumstance? egos, check your ego, right? I mean, everybody wants to be the raw one and take credit for it, but you get more done in that team environment, right? Instead of that. So those are a couple things that I would say as you advance in your schoolwork and in your corporate or professional life, I should say, just kind of remember those takeaways. Can you hear me? I lost. Can you guys hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
We have a question here. You mentioned when working with corporations, having to coordinate with the different departments like HR, legal, cyber. How do you get them to cooperate with each other? Do you have any specific strategies?
Yeah, and I think that's a fantastic question, and I think the biggest one is what I mentioned there. We're all enablers, right? We're all support in business operations. So the ultimate goal of any corporation is to put their products out to make money, right, for the share owners or wherever it might be. And what we do is this group down here, we enable it. We give it the license to operate, the freedom to operate. And as you approach these individuals, they have that exact same mindset. And you just bring your expertise into the room that you're talking in there. And for the most part, I would say that everyone wants to succeed and is willing to collaborate in that way. And that's very important. When you go to a job interview, understand what that culture is. Do some research on the company. See how they operate. See what their values are. Right? Are they a diverse team? Are they one-sided thinking? Right? So that might make your decision as you're looking for a job as well. But I have not find anyone that would not want to collaborate on something like that, and it's because we're that enabler, that business. I hope that answered your question.
I'm pretty sure it did. I completely agree with you on that, that the people in the room in that situation and in law enforcement investigations are really trying to get something done. So
Yeah,
hopefully
yeah,
they
and I
leave
think
the
the other
egos
thing that
back.
we bring in the investigation side of it, we also are the main contact with our law enforcement partners, right? So the FBI has a private sector division within inside the FBI called DSAC, Domestic Security Alliance Council. Inside that, they have a training group called InfraGard, and you can join these organizations because if you're inside a critical infrastructure in the U.S., it becomes part of the U.S. to protect. And they want to know what you're doing. You want their help when you need help on that. And that's a great liaison tool. And for the most part, all the corporate security teams hold that relationship with them. So that's another key piece to that.
Very good. I think that about hits all of our questions, and we're right at the hour mark, which is what usually records and lets students view it. So,
Okay.
boy, I really appreciate it tonight. You made my job easy. Lots
Well,
of
great. I
lots
appreciate
of discussion, lots of questions, lots of stories that helped out a lot. So, the very
it.
good
Yeah, and
bit
if
of
anybody has
information.
any follow-up questions, if you want to collect them and send them to me, I'll be make sure that I can answer any other questions.
Okay, I usually do compile if there's any questions. So, students, if there's anything for those that view it later on the recording that you would like to ask, I can definitely do that and appreciate you offering that. I
Yep.
sure appreciate it, Doug. Thank you very
Yeah, you're
much.
welcome. Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Okay,
Great
you
talking to you. All right.
thank you very much. I'm going
Take
to
care. Good
close it
luck,
out now.
everybody. Yep.
Thank
Good luck.
you.
Stay safe. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's probably the most viewings that I've
Thank you.
had live, so that's been a really good thing. Thanks, students. I'm going to shut her down.
All right. Take care,
All
Randy.
right. Goodbye,
Bye.
sir.